forget. Welcome to the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, where it is another very special Remembrance Day ceremony. Good morning. I'm Annette Hom.
And I'm Bob Cowan. For the next hour, we are going to remember the sacrifice of so many Canadian men and women across all branches of service and their families in the service they made to this country.
And what better place than here at the Canadian Warplane Museum? Now, usually there are over 2,500 people gathered here for the ceremony, but once again, the pandemic has made that impossible. Today's ceremony is closed to the public, and we hope all things will return to normal next year for the museum's 50th anniversary. And we should note that everyone involved in today's production, both behind the camera and in front of it, are fully vaccinated.
Now, on today's show, it is very, very special. Our guest speaker this morning will be Lieutenant General Richard Rohmer. Rohmer, a well-known three-star general who was party to some key moments for Canada in the Second World War. In fact, while on a scouting mission, he spotted Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and called in an airstrike that badly injured one of Adolf Hitler's top generals.
We're also going to hear from other veterans who served this country over the years. And in one, we will learn about a group of men called the Black Battalion. They were men of color, initially not allowed to enlist, but they paved the way, cleared the way for so many others. Theirs is an unlearned story that we have to learn a lot more about in Canada's military history.
Now, the show today will include a flyover by the Lancaster and the C-47 Dakota, and of course, a moment of silence. We're also joined today, as we have for the past few years, by veteran David Pridham from the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. He will guide us through the ceremony today. David, welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks, Bob.
Nice to see you in person again.
It's great to see you again and to have you back for another ceremony here at the museum. The first thing we'll do with today's ceremony is we'll present the colors. Colors historically were very important. If you think back to when infantry had to form a line for battle, the colors were not just a symbol of your unit, it was literally what you rallied around. And you had to protect them at all costs. If the enemy captured the colors, that was a terrible thing. It was shameful. Now, in modern combat, that's obviously not relevant anymore. Colors today are symbols of the units or branches of the armed services that they belong to. When units earn battle honors, those are put on the colors for all time so that you can remember what that unit's achieved. So today, when we bring on the colors, it's to represent all the service members and the units they fought with, what they achieved, and what they sacrificed for over the past. So we'll begin the ceremony today by presenting the colors.
Place the colors.
By the Redeemer University Choir. They were unable to join us last year, of course, because of the pandemic. You couldn't sing, you couldn't spread the virus. So we're so happy to have them back with us again today.
As they join us for O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise.
How amazing is that to hear a choir again, right?
I know, it's beautiful.
Lovely.
Well, Dave Rohr, who we know well as the president and CEO of this magnificent Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, is joining us. He's also up in the air this morning as well.
Right.
He and Leon Evans, it takes two to go behind the controls of the Lancaster. We'll talk about that, but they are up in the air in the Lancaster this morning. But Dave taped a welcome address for us, and we'd like to share that with you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum inside the famed Avro Lancaster, VRA, one of two Lancasters left of 7,377 that were built that are still flying, and this being the last Canadian-built flying Lancaster. It's our honor to be with you today. Every day at the museum is Remembrance Day, but there's only one 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And on that day each year, we proudly take to the skies with the Lancaster, and today we'll be joined with the C-47 Dakota, a D-Day veteran, flown by Canadians over the beach of Normandy on June 6, 1944. And we'll fly together over Hamilton, proudly over Hamilton, and the ceremonies that are being held in Remembrance Day ceremonies. We'll fly over Burlington and Ancaster and Dundas. We'll fly the Niagara Peninsula and then come back over Cayuga and Brantford, Hagersville, and the local area, and we will salute all those who are standing in remembrance of all those who served this great nation and those who paid the ultimate price for their service and didn't come back. We always consider this an honor, and this is the last normal flying day of our season. We end our season each year on Remembrance Day, and we do it, and this trip is coveted by all our pilots because it means so much to us to remember lest we forget, and to salute all those who have served and all those who are serving our country today, and thank them for the freedom and the way of life that we enjoy because of their service. So when we fly over you today, I hope that when you see us, you'll look up and then you'll stop for a moment, bow your head in quiet reflection and with an attitude of appreciation for all those who have served this great nation.
Can't miss that. Well, and presiding over today's ceremony, as he has for many years, is the Reverend Douglas Mitchell.
Let us pray. Gracious God, as we gather on this Remembrance Day, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the poppy. We find ourselves remembering virtually again this year because of COVID restrictions. There are still wars and other actions that have taken a toll and lives lost. Today we remember the latest casualty of this preparation for action, Master Seaman Dwayne Earl, HMCS Winnipeg, who disappeared from his ship as it transited home from Operation Projection and Neon. We also remember the air crew of a CH-148 Cyclone helicopter Stalker attached to HMCS Fredericton, Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Cobrow, Captain Brendan Ian McDonald, Captain Kevin Hagan, Captain Maxine Morin, Sub-Lieutenant Matthew Pike, Master Corporal Matthew Cousins. We remember Captain Jennifer Casey, Public Affairs Officer of the Snowbirds, and Corporal James Choi of the Westminster Regiment, who was killed in a training accident at CFB Wainwright, Alberta. We also remember several local members of the Canadian Armed Forces who gave their lives. Private Mark Anthony Graham, who was killed in Operation Medusa during the NATO mission in Afghanistan. Corporal Nathan Cirilla of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, who was killed while on duty at the National War Memorial. Also, Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent, killed in a hit-and-run just days earlier. This year is especially poignant for veterans of the Resolute Support Mission of Afghanistan. We acknowledge the mixed emotions they may be feeling since the Taliban retook Afghanistan so swiftly after the troops from the mission left. We also remember and acknowledge those interpreters and others who were left behind. We are reminded that veterans are with us every day. As we are remembering today, we acknowledge that Remembrance Day began at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. We also acknowledge those veterans of World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, and the Iraq War, as well as the many UN peacekeeping missions that have resulted in the loss of life and injuries to the members of the Canadian Armed Forces who were called to serve in various police actions. All these lives lost, and numerous lives changed by war, and we're no closer to the peace that we seek. So we ask you, O God, to remind us that we must strive harder as we seek to bring peace to this world of yours and ours. Help us to remember the principles that our veterans fought and died for, to be vigilant when we see others trying to usurp our freedoms by their language and actions. Remain with us as we leave this time of remembrance and go into the world to continue to tell of the sacrifices that our veterans made and continue to make for our children and grandchildren. Amen. And our scripture reading for this morning comes from the book of Psalms, number 139, verses 1 to 18. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes behold my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty are your thoughts to me, O God! How vast is the sum of them! I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end, I am still with you. May God bless to us this reading from the Word. Amen.
My father, despite being very much of an amateur historian, had not heard anything about the battalion. But as a young man working for CN Rail,
He landed on and fought alongside Canadian soldiers.
Yes, as a British commander, then made his way to Canada to settle in Burlington with his wife Colleen, and had a beautiful life. But oh, you know what? And thank you, Chantel. Okay, we will get to Gordon Schottlander and his experiences on D-Day, but now we are ready to learn about the Black Battalion.
Yes. One group of Canadians led the way for others in the First World War while battling racism and discrimination. Douglas Ruck joins us this morning with more on the Black Battalion. Thank you for joining us.
good morning, Annette. Thank you for inviting me.
Your father, Calvin, is largely credited for bringing the Black Battalion's story up front. How did he, what was his connection to the Black Battalion?
That's a very interesting part of the story. My father, despite being very much of an amateur historian, had not heard anything about the battalion. But as a young man working for CN Rail as a porter, he noticed that some of the older gentlemen, who were also porters, had a lapel pin, and he asked them about it. And they told him that they were members of the No. 2 Construction Battalion that had served during the First World War. And that was his introduction to the battalion.
And this was 600 members of this battalion, most of them from Nova Scotia, and they were not allowed to carry rifles. Tell me what their role in the First World War was.
Well, let me take it back just a little bit. When war broke out, Wilfrid Laurier, who was leader of opposition at that time, expressed the view that Canada would support Britain as one heart and one mind. But it soon became apparent that not just one heart and one mind, but also one color. And that color was white, not black. So when those young men also went to the recruitment offices to become part of the war effort, they were told, you cannot, because this is a white man's war. You're not wanted. We do not need your assistance. So they were rejected. And between 1914 and 1916, they fought to fight. They fought to be allowed to be patriots. They fought to be allowed to go overseas to defend their country, to support democracy. And when they were finally allowed in 1916, it was not carrying rifles, it was not armed, but as a non-combatant unit. Therefore, they were given picks and shovels, and their jobs were to dig trenches. In fact, they were connected to a forestry corps. And they spent most of the war, in fact, not all the war, in the lumber yards, preparing lumber for railways, for trenches, taking care of horses. That was a major part of the war at that time. But they were viewed as being a secondary aspect. They were viewed as doing menial tasks, which is not that dissimilar, in fact, to what they dealt with in their own, at home here in Canada. It was part of that not being strong enough, not being fit enough to carry rifles, to be part of the war effort. So that's where they were subjugated to the secondary role for the most part, although very important as it was.
Very, very important, because, and you think about the danger that they place themselves in, because they're going in and they're literally paving the way.
Well, that's very true. I mean, it was extraordinary sacrifice. For the most part, they weren't wanted, as you pointed out in the introduction. They weren't wanted whatsoever. It was stated by the head of the Canadian Force at that time, Major General Willoughby Watkins, that these men, that Negroes, in fact, were vain and imitative and will make poor soldiers. These young men, were not fit to be in the Canadian military. They were not smart enough, they were not strong enough, and that the white troops would not want to work with them. So they were rejected upon that basis and given what they viewed as being menial tasks, which was the lumber, the other work, secondary work, but they were not there as a combat unit.
Right, but really the work that they did was so much more important. Soldiers couldn't fight without the work that they did.
Well, that's true. Without them, the Canadian war effort would have floundered. It would not have had a chance to succeed. Their sacrifice was extraordinary, but was never really recognized for what it was.
It's shameful.
The very fact, it's exactly shameful. The fact they were put in a non-combatant unit was viewed as being a compromise because it was felt the white troops would be uncomfortable working around them. In fact, it had been proposed that when they went overseas, they would sail alone on a troop ship without any other white troops, and in fact, they would not have a naval escort because that's how they were viewed as being not worth that kind of effort.
What changed?
Well, during that period of time, very little changed, in fact. They came back home, really were unrecognized what they had done, what they had accomplished, and very few people heard of them. They were barely a footnote in the history books. What has changed, in fact, in some ways, goes back to the works of my father, the effort of his book, and what others were doing in small pockets around this country to keep this memory alive. And over time, we've seen it slowly gain some traction to the point now where as the African population is seeking, in fact, the African Canadian population is seeking an apology from the government to finally come out and respect what these men did and a full acknowledgement apology for how they were treated. Not just the men, their families, and I would say to you, all African Canadian citizens were viewed and treated in this manner. And the time has come for the apology which we're hoping to receive here in July of this year, July 2022. And
it didn't come? Or
well,
the next July it's coming?
That's right, that's correct, yes. So far we've had an intent to apologize delivered by the Minister of National Defense, and we're looking for the formal apology to take place in July of next year.
Okay, we are looking forward to that. Douglas Ruck, thank you for sharing your story, your father's story as well. Very important history lesson today.
My pleasure, and thank you very much once again.
And we really have so much more to learn about that.
Oh yeah, and you're right, it is shameful, but I'm glad they're being recognized today. Well, we were mentioning earlier, well-known Burlington veteran, Gordon Schottlander, and he shared with us his experiences on D-Day. Gordon Schottlander, great to see you on another Remembrance Day
Another
special
one
on
come
CHCH.
around so fast.
I know.
Yes.
Now, we were on Skype last year. Great to see you here in person at
It's
the
very
Canadian
nice too,
Warplane
Bob,
Heritage
and I'm
Museum.
glad to see you again.
Yes. Now, are we about to returning 97? How old are we?
I'm 96 now, I'll be 97 in 2 months.
Wow. I don't believe it. You're looking
Well,
amazing.
there you go. I'm doing pretty good, actually, thank you.
You're doing great. You look
Yeah,
great. And
yeah.
your chest looks great. Let's talk about some of those medals.
These two are General Service medals that everybody got. These three are medals for being in a war zone, in a battle zone. One is Africa, one is France, and the other is Europe.
Let's start with D-Day.
Yes.
Full disclosure, your son Dave is
Yes.
an old friend and an old neighbor of mine.
That's right, I
And
remember that.
He first told me about your stories of D-Day. He actually mentioned a night when he had rented Saving Private Ryan with Tom Hanks. But that was actually a difficult movie for you to watch because that opening scene
haven't
brought
really
back some memories.
I've seen some of it, but I didn't really watch the beach scene.
Yeah, it was too difficult.
I heard it was very realistic, and I didn't particularly want to see that again.
Well,
so,
we're going to ask you to relive that day.
yes.
How scared were you?
Okay.
How scary was that?
Oh, it's pretty scary, but you know, I was an officer, so I had 30 men to look after. So it was a bonus from that point of view that I had to be concerned about them as well as myself. And frankly, none of us knew what it was going to be like to be in a boat with machine guns hitting the boat, and then knowing that the front of that boat is going down, and you're going to have to walk out into it. Scary, yeah. More scary when we got in the water, when bullets were flying.
Yeah. Were you expecting more cover?
No, I wasn't expecting more cover, but you know, the British had launched a lot of air power and naval power on the beach, and it wasn't effective. The Germans were too well dug in. They were too well reinforced there.
Yeah. You must have seen people die right in front of you.
Yes,
Friends?
I did. Yes, I lost some of my friends on that day, and lost some more when we were going further up the beach, and it was a bad day. And the only reason I relive it is because my father died without telling us anything about his war, or very little, and we never know why he got a military medal for bravery, and I could never find out. So I thought it was only right for my family to open up on it a bit.
Yeah.
But it isn't a day that I care to remember.
Yeah, and we thank you for sharing with us as well. How long was it getting to the beach, through the beach, and beyond?
It's hard
What
for
was
me.
that day like?
It's hard for me to say. To get on the beach was as fast as you could probably do it. Probably 3 or 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Once we were on the beach, we were stuck there for quite a few hours. And of course, being British, we all smoked our cigarettes and made some tea. So we were undercover from.
Right.
And then we moved up onto the beach, off the beach later in the day.
So when you got past that point, what was the rest of the day like?
The rest of the day on D-Day was okay because we got up off the beach and were able to make some move forward. We got into some hedgerows and a lot of things going on. The Germans were retaliating to a certain extent, and then we had to capture some farms and machine gun turrets and things like that. So it was a busy day. It was a busy day.
To say the least. Now, you were injured at one point. Was that in
I
France?
was injured out about 9 days after D-Day.
Okay, and what happened?
Well, I stood up in front of a mortar bomb. We were going to attack a farm. We were behind a hedgerow, and everybody, when you go to attack something, you stand up, look, and sit, go down again. As I stood up, a mortar bomb went off right in front of us. Now, it was some maybe 12 feet, 14 feet away, so I got injured across my chest and top of my stomach and that kind of thing. Fortunately, not too seriously, amazingly.
How long was the recovery? And where was the recovery?
The recovery, they took me back to England. I was in hospital there. Then they sent me to Northern Ireland, to a place called Bangor. and I recovered there, and that's where I met my wife of 65 years in Northern Ireland.
And then you made your way to Canada.
That's right. We made our way to Canada in around 1950.
Yeah. Now you thought about, thought it was important to share your stories of the war, but do you think about it often?
No, I don't. When you get older, you think about a lot of things, and the bad things you tend not to think about so much if you can help it.
Yeah. Have you driven up Brand Street?
Yes, I have. I
Yes,
had a
there's
look
a
at
big
all
picture of you.
Yes, I've seen that.
Yes, the Legion put
Yeah,
up.
that's
Actually,
very
you're
nice.
one of my family members is across the street from you, George
That's
News,
right.
Ireland.
Yeah,
But that was the
that-
First World War. But,
First World War, yes.
yeah.
Well, I was just a young second lieutenant in that picture.
Yes.
I'd just been commissioned.
So proudly hanging over Brant Street in Burlington, and last year you received the key to the city.
That's right. That's amazing.
Well, your service is amazing.
Thank
and
you.
We're so thankful you're joining us today on our special here at
Thank
the
you.
Canadian Warplane
I
Heritage
appreciate it.
Museum.
Thank you
And have
very
a
much.
happy 97th birthday, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate that. That's very nice.
Oh, those
Dave-
stories.
Oh, yeah, David Layton. I'm sure you're as enthralled as I am about D-Day in particular, the heroics of that day, and getting to speak to someone like Gordon who was actually there.
Oh, it's incredible. I'm incredibly grateful to him for opening up about his experience, because it's not easy to do. I mean, he said his own father didn't tell anything
Yeah,
about his
yeah.
First World War experiences, and he earned a military medal,
Yeah.
which is an award for bravery. His children know nothing about it,
Yeah,
which is a shame.
So we thank Gordon for sharing, and so many other veterans.
That's right. And I'm glad Douglas Ruck told us about the Black Battalion as
Yeah.
well. I mean, talk about sacrifice. Imagine going up, doing construction right near the front lines, and you don't even have a weapon to defend
Yeah.
yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
They were they were given picks and shovels, he said, instead of rifles.
That's right. I mean, talk about the stress of that. But it's just incredible, back to Mr. Schottlander again, to have, he's not only the only D-Day veteran
Yes.
we have today.
Yeah.
We have another interview coming up, and one of the airplanes flying today is also a D-Day veteran.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks very much. Well, Redeemer University Choir is going to play now their rendition of In Flanders Field, composed by Kirkland Adson.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark that place, and in the sky, the lark still bravely singing flies. Steps tread amid the guns below.
Of the 11th day of the 11th month, we are getting ready for our moment of silence and the fly past.
Yeah, the stars of the fly past, the famous Lancaster, but also the Dakota.
That's right. The Dakota is the only war veteran aircraft in our collection. It flew on D-Day.
Yeah.
And here's our moment of silence.
Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Well, now to one of our featured presentations this morning, Lieutenant General Richard Rohmer. So many stories that he shared with us. We've got about 15 minutes here. He could go all day, but from his flying over D-Day to his scouting missions to the Rommel story you mentioned earlier, he's got a great story about George S. Patton coming up, so enjoy as we share our conversation with Lieutenant General Richard Rohmer. It is an honor to be joined by three-star General Richard Rohmer. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You look fairly weighted down there with medals.
It's some are in the center, some are in the...
You got to balance these things.
You got to balance it out, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a problem the rest of us civilians don't have to worry about.
Well, I'm from Hamilton, you know. So
we know you're from Hamilton.
So that's one of the advantages that I have and disadvantages that I have. So in any event, I'm proud to be a Hamiltonian.
And we're so proud of you and your incredible service. Now, there's so many medals there. I'm going to guess the one that means the most to you is right in the center of your chest.
Center of the chest, it's this blue and white one. It's the Distinguished Flying Cross from World War II. I was a fighter reconnaissance pilot, flying the Mustang fighter on a reconnaissance tour of operations. And as a result of that, 135 missions, survived them all, hit once. I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross.
And well deserved. We're going to talk about how you got there in D-Day, but I want to talk about how you got here today. You were flown by the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in a Dakota that served on D-Day, flew over D-Day, dropping paratroopers on the same day you were flying your Spitfire.
But more than the same day. I was over the beaches on D-Day at 500 feet in my Mustang fighter on a reconnaissance mission. There were two of us. And as we were over the beaches, the first landing craft were coming in, and I'm right down there with them. And I did the reconnaissance with Jack Taylor, my number one. We went down to Caen to take a look at what was happening there, then back up the Orne River over the bridge that was just being taken by the British in their gliders and the paratroopers. So it was a very interesting exercise on D-Day morning. Now today, I had a terrible surprise. I was being picked up by a Dakota aircraft, a transport aircraft that had been used by the British on D-Day for dropping paratroopers. As it turned out, that airplane that I was flying in today was an airplane that dropped British paratroopers just to the east of the Orne at the same time I was over the beaches in just right there at the same time. As so it all worked together, and it was a.
What was that like, flying in that plane today? How did you feel?
It moved me to tears. And being from Hamilton, I rarely get moved to tears. You can believe that.
Now you've got, is it a 97th birthday coming up?
No.
How old are you?
That's a better question. I'll be 98.
98 coming up. You're 97 now.
In January.
I tried shaving a year off for you.
I know. You can't succeed.
Now, when did you stop flying?
About 2 years ago. And,
Seriously?
Oh, seriously. Oh, I'm a very skilled pilot, still am.
You were flying at 95.
Of course, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, you're flying out of what, Kincardine Airport? In Cessna?
And Collingwood.
In Collingwood.
Yep, absolutely. So, in any event, I'm really privileged to be here today and part of this great organization. I'm very proud of the way that David and all of the people have put this, and they're maintaining it and making it grow. It's fantastic.
It's a true jewel, absolutely. Let's get back over the skies of Normandy. Now, Spitfires, Mustangs, armed to the teeth.
Armed to the teeth.
But you couldn't use them.
never fired the guns in anger because I was reconnaissance with a camera.
How frustrating was that?
Not at all, because I was always being shot at. As soon as I was airborne out of the beachhead, the flak was coming from the German people who wanted to kill me.
Yeah.
That was the name of the game.
Yeah.
And they only hit me once, but I flew through.
What happened?
What happened? I'm over that sector of France, and I'm doing a reconnaissance, and all of a sudden a big hole appeared in my left wing. Choom. It was gone. Fortunately, I could still fly the airplane, and I got it back to base. So that was it. But otherwise,
how scared were you?
I was always scared. No,
always?
Not always. Didn't know any better part of the time. But in any event, the work we did for the Army to see what was going on in the German side of things was monumentally important, and we did it. And at that point, I was 20 years old, and you know, at 20, you don't worry too much about
You're pretty
anything.
cocky.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, there was another critical reconnaissance run when you saw a German staff car that turned out to be a very valuable asset.
Yes, well, this was in July after D-Day. We had made great progress, and I'm out doing a reconnaissance, and I had 3 people with me guarding me, and I came across this staff car rushing down the road, German staff car, top down, 2 people in the front seat, 3 in the back, and I'm very low. I could almost touch them. I didn't know who they were at all. I had no idea.
But you figured it was somebody important.
Well, absolutely. He's in a staff car, for heaven's sake, and you have all kinds of brass.
Yeah.
So what I did was what I was really told to do. I didn't attack him. I called on the radio to group headquarters behind the lines to report the location of this staff car, which I did.
Yeah.
And reality was, as we found out after the war, the headquarters people brought in a Spitfire to the point where that I've given them, shot up this car, and the man in the front seat of the car, who was badly injured as a result of getting shot up, was a man called Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the great German general.
Yes, one of Hitler's top generals.
He's a top general. He, in the shoot-up that occurred, the Spitfire, the first shell hit the driver of the car and killed him. The car then went off the road, hit a stump, and the man in the passenger seat, his head was turned this way, watching what was coming on behind him. And when the car hit the stump, his head was turned, his head hit the windscreen post on this side. It was Rommel. He loved to be in the front seat to map read, and he was on his way from the his Panzer headquarters to his headquarters on the Seine River up near Paris. So that's where he was going. So what happened to him was that he was almost killed. The impact on the windscreen post was intense, and he survived. And
But it took him out of the picture.
Yeah, so there are lots of pictures of him with his caved-in head. They got him to the Luftwaffe hospital close by, and he then went back to his home in Ulm, Germany, to recuperate, which he ultimately did.
Yeah, but this was a huge loss to Hitler, thanks to you.
Oh, a huge hut. But Hitler also thought that Rommel had been part of the plot that occurred the next 2 days, where a big bomb was exploded in Hitler's headquarters.
Right. So
And
that event was that close.
It was that close time-wise.
Time-wise, okay.
And Hitler eventually was convinced by the SS that Rommel had been part of the plot to kill him. So in October, when Rommel was ready to come back to command, Hitler decided he would send a couple of young generals with 2 pills to Rommel, which he did, which they did. And the letter from Hitler said, "I believe that you were part of the plot to kill me. They have cyanide pills. If you take one of the pills and kill yourself, it'll be said that you died of injuries, and you'll be given a full state funeral. Your wife will be protected, and your son. And if you don't take the pill, you'll be stripped of your rank forthwith and given a trial for treason, and your wife will not be protected, nor will your son." So he took the pill and killed himself. So that's the story of Rommel. And it started with catching him.
Yeah, with you catching him.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another general you were face to face with, Patton.
Well, Patton was really a superb general. I was very, he was the kind of guy that you could relate to, because he was always doing things, and he would do it himself. He'd get out and do this.
Was he as imposing as we saw in the movie version?
Well, he was really, oh yes. The movie version was screwed up in many ways. But in any event, my little story was a personal
How did you meet him?
Near Liverpool. Little airfield, we all land there, grass airfield. So we're in it was a training base, very pussy. And we all get in the mess. And someone says, "General Patton is going to come to inspect you tomorrow morning." And we, all of us, American and so forth, we all looked around and said, "Who the hell is General Patton?"
Really?
We didn't know who he was. Somebody said, "Oh, well, he's one of our generals, and
Apparently he's a big deal.
Big deal, and he's been sent up to do something." So the next morning, we had all our airplanes lined up on this little airfield, grass airfield, and there were about 10 or 12 of us. And I'm right in the middle of this long line, north and south, standing in front of my Mustang. And I'm a little guy. I'm 20 years old. I look about 15 years old, which is, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, a Jeep comes down the road toward us and goes down to the end of the line, and there's General Patton in the Jeep. So he gets out. I watch him way down there.
Yeah.
I watch him get out of the Jeep. He's got his wet cap on, his revolvers, and he's...
With the ivory revolvers?
Yeah.
They were like in the movie? Was that accurate?
Ivory, yes.
Yeah.
I've forgotten whether ivory or pearl.
Yeah.
One of them was for pimps, he said. So in any event, he comes striding right along, wedge cap. It's all his medals and his revolvers and his riding breeks. Really 6'2", posing white-haired man. And he doesn't stop to talk to anybody. He comes right up this whole line he doesn't stop until he gets to me. And he stopped and he looked down at this. I looked to be about 16, not 20. And I'm looking up at him. I can still see his face. And he looks at me, and he looks at this big Mustang, which is model is around here. And he looks down at me and he says, "Boy," he said, "how old are you?" I said, "I'm 20, sir." And he said, "Do you fly that great goddamn airplane?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, he couldn't believe it. He said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Son of a bitch," and he walked off. So that was my meeting with General Patton.
That is amazing.
But it worked very well. And the next I saw of his troops, I would catch them in France, the tanks moving in certain areas, his tanks. He was a great general.
And I'll tell you, there's not enough titles for you.
Well, I do the best I can.
Well,
I'm just a Hamilton boy.
just a Hamilton boy. Did you want the same plane ride on the way back home, General Rohmer?
That'd be very nice.
I think I can arrange that.
Can you arrange that? That'd be great.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy being had.
Fascinating man.
And it was amazing talking to him and saying goodbye as he left in the Dakota.
Yes.
The same plane that flew overhead moments ago as part of our Lest We Forget special.
Well, now we're going to find out more about a plane that is so large it doesn't even fit into the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. One of the most popular displays here at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum is actually just outside the museum. It's the de Havilland Buffalo. And our next guest, retired Major Wally Adam, knows a lot about that aircraft. Tell me about it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, the de Havilland Canada has a series of aircraft named after animals, chipmunk and otter and beaver and caribou. Finally built the Buffalo, the fifth in the series. It's a turboprop aircraft and ideally suited for military use. Fuselage is square, so you can easily load jeeps and small trucks and equipment like that in it. And it has been extensively used in the Canadian Forces for, I think it's at least 50 years now. And it started out as a tactical transport aircraft in St. Hubert, Quebec, and eventually went to search and rescue. And it's still flying today in search and rescue on the West Coast with 442 Squadron. So it's had an extensive history with the military. It's a Canadian-designed and Canadian-built product, so we're quite proud of it.
Now, when you say tactical transport, what does that mean?
Well, it means you're basically supporting the Army in case they're called upon to go to war. And we practice paradropping, a lot of work with the Van Doos, the Airborne Regiment when that existed, the RCR in London, and all of the jump regiments. We trained with them doing live paradrops and also carrying equipment such as jeeps and field guns, and we could also airdrop supplies by parachute or by extraction to the Army forces on the ground.
And you did search and rescue out west as well?
That's correct. Search and rescue was a second 3 years on the Buffalo, and that was my final fixed wing flying, actually, as it turned out.
Now, before that, you were in Tanzania in what you described to me as the other Cold War. Tell me about this.
Yes, it was actually part of a program run actually by External Affairs, and we were seconded to External Affairs for the year that I was there, 1967, and it was an aid program to a young developing country called Tanzania. I mean, they became independent in 1961, and then they joined with, and it was Tanganyika, they joined with Zanzibar to become Tanzania in 1964, and I was there in 67. So it was a young, proud country, and we were there to train their pilots on transport operations with aircraft that Canada had donated to Tanzania.
And this is where the caribou and the otter come in?
That's correct. I was flying both at the time, and they had a 5-year program as well on that. I was sort of in the middle of it.
And what were they flying for? This was transport, largely.
This was transport operations, and while I was there, a lot of the work was, the flying was, they call battalion rotation. We'd fly to Zanzibar or other exotic places like that, and take troops there and bring troops back. And also, we had occasion to go to pretty well all of the small dirt strips in the entire country, so it was quite a thrilling experience. That was about half of the work. work. The other half was actual flying training, where we would take up a student and do various procedures in the air right near the airport where we were based, which was Dar es Salaam.
And then the Buffalo still holds a very special place in your heart because you were volunteering here at the Warplane Museum, and the museum acquired a Buffalo. You helped to restore it.
That's correct. I was a new volunteer here, and I was just absolutely thrilled when I found out that a party of people associated with the museum were obtaining a Buffalo, and we spent over 5 years restoring that to static display condition. There was no attempt at ever making it a flying aircraft because it has turbine engines, and this museum does not actually deal with turbine engines. Plus there were other reasons to do with cost as well.
And the size of it, it's too big to bring in here.
It is too big to fit in the hangar because the tail is too tall for the hangar doors. But when the weather's right, our education department in particular love to bring school children out, and they use that as an outdoor classroom. And they can teach pretty well any subject they want as part of the curriculum.
Well, Wally Adams, thank you for your service. Thank you for your volunteer work here at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. I understand you do tours as well. You've taught me a lot more about one of the most important aircraft here. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yes, thanks again to Wally Adams for his service and also joining us on our Lest We Forget special. Now, pre-recorded for us, Abide With Me from the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry Choir.
And now the laying of the wreaths. David Pridham, help us out with this. This is a kind of a symbol at the end of most Remembrance Day ceremonies.
That's right, Annette. In our normal ceremony, we've had a large group of wreaths, but just for today, the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum Board of Directors, the museum volunteers. The third wreath is to the Canadian Armed Forces, and the final wreath today is from Veterans Affairs Canada.
And I've always wondered, what happens to these wreaths afterwards? Are they hung in the museum for a while?
That's right. Some of them are stored safely here, and a lot of organizations keep their wreaths safe until the next year.
Very important symbols, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And now the Reverend Douglas Mitchell.
As we leave this time of virtual remembrance and the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the poppy, Let us go into the world to spread the message of God's love and peace to all those we meet. Amen.
And we thank you for joining us here at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. Our ceremony is over. Let's hope next year in person again with all the thousands of people that are normally here.
That the Warplane Heritage Museum is open this afternoon.
Yes, from 1
to 5
until 5. You do have to show proof of vaccination. And just a heads up, if you're coming from Hamilton, you're going to want to go around the Highway 6 bypass because of construction.
Yes. David Pridham, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it every year.
We appreciate you being here. You're very welcome.
Thank you to our veterans as well, who told us such valuable stories.
Absolutely.
Important pieces of history.
Redeemer University Choir
Yes.
and all the participants today on our special Lest We Forget. Thank you so much for joining us in our coverage today.